This is the Keychron K3 Max. It's the spiritual successor to the original Keychron K series low-profile keyboards. Now, after Keychron did a quick detour with their Pro Series boards, which strayed away from their iconic color scheme but did bring in some notable improvements, the Max captures all of those changes and more while returning to the look that has made Keychron famous from the start. This is an icon updated for the modern times, but it still may fall short in a couple of important areas. Stay tuned to the end for the full list of differentiators and deal breakers to find out why. Jumping into a breakdown of the keyboard, we'll begin with build and design. Understanding the design is very easy if you're already familiar with the original Keychron K series. If you want full details on this, check out my review of this, the Keychron K3 V2, linked in the video description. For a summary and a quick refresher, the biggest thing to call out is that this low-profile keyboard is quite possibly the smallest footprint on a low-profile keyboard you can find on the market today. It is shockingly thin, it's extremely small, and it sports next to no bezel around the keys. It's truly just typing area and nothing else. While the K3 Pro first introduced a change from ABS keycaps to double-shot PBT, the Max model takes that same great keycap, but returns it to the color scheme that so many Keychron fans know and love. I personally was not a fan of the Pro color and was a little bit perplexed about the decision to move away from such an iconic and simple gray with orange color accents. Now, while the return is a welcome change, it is also likely the end of the white Pro version, which was very clean and a big loss for people who like to have full white desk setups. Beneath the new keycaps sits an unchanged body with an aluminum top case and an ABS plastic bottom. This case remains one of, if not the thinnest and lightest low-profile cases on the market. It's still not the most sturdy, but the trade-off is a small footprint and a weight of just 525 grams or 1.16 pounds. My version is the K3, which is a 75% model. I'm drawn to this because it keeps the function row, plus page up, page down, all of that on the side, and full-size arrow keys. It's also likely to be the closest thing to your laptop keyboard layout, making it easier to switch back and forth if you happen to work sometimes at your desk and sometimes directly from your laptop. Keep in mind though that if you don't like the 75% layout, this K Max series includes just about any size keyboard you could possibly want. It goes from as small as a little tiny 65% layout all the way up to a 100% full-size keyboard. They even do Alice layouts for ergonomic lovers, and this one weird 80% model that has a numpad over the arrow keys. Keychron truly has been trying to ensure that they have a keyboard in their lineup for literally everyone. Moving over to typing experience, the first thing to think about is ergonomics. With how low this keyboard is, it's much closer to typing on a laptop than it is to typing on a full-size mechanical keyboard. Thankfully though, on the back there are two-stage feet to give it a bit more lift and some customization to your typing angle. These feet take the keyboard from a standard and quite low 2.4 degrees up to 4.2 degrees and 6.5 degrees. I find that the highest angle is the most comfortable for me. I also found it very interesting that the frame and feet appear to be exactly the same as the earlier models, but the original model advertised 6 and 9 degrees of angle. I measured both versions and they actually match these newer 2, 4, and 6 numbers in their true reality, not the old 6 and 9 degrees. This makes me wonder who caught this error and also encourages me as a reviewer to do a better job and validate these claims going forward. So I'm going to make sure that the measurements that companies are advertising in the future truly match the angle that their keyboard is at. Angle aside, beneath the beautiful double-shot PBT keycaps sits one of 3 Gateron low-profile 2.0 switches. You can choose between linear reds, tactile browns, or clicky blues. These switch types are totally standard, but bring some interesting thoughts to mind to me recently. First, I don't personally like clicky switches, but it seems like clicky options are getting harder and harder to find on new keyboards. It seems like many brands are focused on linear first and foremost, as smooth and quiet seem to be the buzzwords of the moment and the priority for most people. As a result, it's good to see that the folks out there who like clickies still have Keychron as an option. That way they can get what they want out of the box without having to fully customize a keyboard in order to get that clicky switch. The next thing I wanted to share was some slightly mixed feelings about switches in general. Now, I've been in this keyboard hobby for just a few years. I'm still relatively new, but I've already witnessed what I'm sure many of you keyboard lovers out there have also seen, which is a recent explosion in options for boards, keycaps, and what I'm discussing right now, which is the switches. Now, while one side of me sees another Keychron keyboard with red, brown, and blue as slightly boring or lacking in effort or ambition, another side of me is just plain relieved to see a list of switches and understand what they mean rather than having to research what the heck cowberry is. Or try to understand the difference between baby raccoon and baby kangaroo switches. Or how about Milky versus Milky Pro versus Cream? I think you get the point. But one other would be the fact that Keychron has a switch, not available for this keyboard, but they have one that's called Mint, and it's a tactile switch. And then Newfie has a switch called Mint that's linear. So yeah, there's something super refreshing about choosing between the nice, traditional, boring options of red, brown, and blue. It may not be as cool as the super silent, creamy pro milk from a cow 2.0 switches, but it's refreshing nonetheless. All right, getting off my soapbox, my keyboard has browns, and so let's see how it sounds, and for context, how it compares to the K3 V2, which has optical browns. The defining characteristic of this K3 V2 with the optical brown switches was the quiet, almost dainty sound that it made. The defining characteristic of this new K3 Max model with the brown switches, sadly, is a bit of hollowness. That's the single biggest thing that I both hear and feel when using it. Overall, it feels fine to type on. It's nothing super special, but it's very smooth and quite effortless and natural. I didn't have any sort of learning curve trying to adjust to typing on this board, which is more than I can say for the low free flow that I've been testing recently as well. Video on that coming soon. The spacebar in particular could be a little bit better. It's a little on the loud side and it sounds and feels particularly hollow compared to the rest of the board. It even feels a bit rattly if you hit it hard enough. I also found this to be intriguing in my testing. If you press this spacebar very softly, it makes almost the same volume of sound as if you press it super hard. Now, by contrast, the old version was also quite loud, and it was easy to bottom out, which caused this obnoxious clacking sound. But if you pressed it softly, it was super quiet. On the Max, thankfully, bottoming out doesn't happen, but even the slightest tap on this spacebar is quite loud. So it's an improvement, but it still has some work to do. Focusing on the keycaps, the feel of the new keycaps are such a great upgrade from the original model. Going from ABS plastic to PBT alone is a really nice upgrade, and it's going to hold up against shine in the long term. But the keycap size increase makes them much more visually appealing and makes typing much more natural. It also had the unexpected benefit in that it fixed this strange sensation that I experienced on the original that made it feel like the keys were tilted away from me. Even though the new version has virtually an identical angle, I don't experience that feeling that the keys are falling away from me at all, even at the lowest typing angle. This has prompted me to think a little bit more deeply and try to look for some patterns here. Most recently, I experienced a similar sensation in my review of the Yunzi B75 Pro keyboard. The two things that keyboard and the original K3 have in common are, number one, the keycaps are small. In Keychron's case, there are gaps. In Yunzi's case, they're just heavily tapered, giving it a very small usable surface area. And number two, they both have text on the keys, which is top justified. These two things together might be a reason why I'm getting this feeling. If you have any experience with a similar thing, or if you've got any other theories, I'm open to them, so please let me know down in the comments. Now again, focusing on the keycaps, I had noted in my previous review that the gaps between the keys on the original helped me to cut down on typing errors. Going back to this more common keycap did not suddenly cause an influx of errors, thankfully. And if it means that I don't have to feel like the keyboard is slanted away from me, it's 100% worth the trade-off. Finally, the last things to note on the keycaps are that they have a slight concave curve. The font is now bigger, bolder, brighter, and it's moved to the middle of the keycaps, all of which I'd say are positives in my book. Moving away from typing and onto other functionality and features, the Max keyboards continue to have both white backlighting options and RGB available. My version has RGB, which can easily be toggled with the light mode button in the top right corner of the keyboard. Now, while this is handy, it is such a double-edged sword. There are 22 variations of RGB lighting and 14 variations on the white version. This key is right next to the delete key, and it's in the exact location where many other keyboards place the delete key. As a result, the number of times that I've hit this button by mistake, resulting in some crazy flashing RGB madness appearing, is insane. Now, here are a couple of options of how you can avoid this happening to you and preventing you from having to click through 21 times to get back to the lighting that you want. Option 1 is to learn the keyboard shortcuts. Function A and Function Q allow you to toggle RGB modes up and down. So if you accidentally hit the RGB button once, use Function A to go back to your preferred lighting setup. Option number 2 is to disable RGB altogether. You can do this with either Function plus the RGB button or Function plus Tab. Now, if you hit the button by mistake, it won't change anything. This is also nice for users who don't like RGB lighting at all, as turning it off does persist after turning the keyboard off and back on, which is not the case recently when I tested the aforementioned Yunzi keyboard. Options number 3 and 4 involve a bit of customization via the Keychron Launcher web app. That leverages the QMK compatibility that's built into these newer Keychron models. Now, simply to use it, connect your keyboard with the included USB cable and just override the RGB button on the Key Map tab. My option 3 is to simply change the RGB button to function as delete, or to swap RGB and delete to get them where you might like them instead. That way, you can either have 2 delete keys without the risk of messing up your RGB at all, or you can place the keys in a place where you won't run into the issues that I have. If you do get rid of the RGB key and then need to alter your RGB after, you can still do that with the Function A or Function Q shortcuts mentioned earlier. Finally, option number 4 is to swap the RGB button functions. On layer 0 for Mac, or layer 1 for Windows, change from RGB mode to RGB toggle. Then on layer 1 for Mac, or 3 for Windows, change from RGB toggle to RGB mode. The result of this change is that just hitting the RGB button by mistake will toggle RGB on and off. If you hit that by mistake when typing, trying to hit the delete key, just tap it again to turn your lights back on. To me, this is easier than tapping through all the different modes or trying to remember Function plus A or Function plus Q. And you can always just use Function RGB if you want to change it using that button. All in all, it's frustrating that this key exists, in my opinion, But it's nice that Keychron now has the flexibility to customize your key setup with their very easy to use web app. Outside of the RGB button, I have very few issues with the key layout of the K3 Max. The entire layout is completely unchanged from the original model. The function button is on the right, and the function row is pretty solid. There are a few opportunities to swap keycaps, with some that are included in the box. If you don't like the orange escape key, you can change the escape key to gray. If you want more orange, you can change the enter key to orange. You can also move between Mac keys, which come installed, and Windows keys, which come in the box. And finally, you can swap one key on the function row to make it a lock key. So if you want to get rid of that RGB key altogether and reprogram it to lock your computer, you've got the keycap to do so. Unfortunately though, unless I'm completely missing it, there isn't a way to change a key map to the lock function. Instead, you have to use a macro. I'm going to put the specific macros needed on the screen and also down in the video description so that if you want to use them, you can just copy and paste them in and it'll be much easier. For context, all these are doing is Windows L for locking a PC and Control Command Q for locking a Mac. Moving over to connectivity, the full Keychron Max lineup allows you to connect in a wired mode via USB-C on the back and the included USB-A to USB-C cable. The cable is good, but it's not as incredible as the one that comes with Keychron mice. Link to that video in the description so you know what I'm talking about. You can also use Bluetooth, which includes multi-device for up to 3 devices. And finally, new with the Max lineup is the introduction of a 1000 Hertz USB receiver. This is a big improvement for these keyboards. It makes them work for more people and also enhances gaming with the inclusion of that 1000 Hertz polling. It's very nice that they finally made this upgrade. If you want to cut down on latency even more, similar to Keychron's mice, they include a USB-C to USB-A adapter so that you can position the receiver as close as possible to your keyboard. However, unlike with a mouse where the cable is going to potentially provide some resistance and movement is paramount, if you're concerned about latency, probably just want to plug it in instead and use it in a wired mode. That's probably a simpler approach. When using a wireless connection, I ran into issues with the original Keychron model as it took what felt like ages to wake up from sleep. And it would go to sleep in just 10 minutes. With the Max version, I haven't noticed this issue at all through my testing. I'm not sure if it just doesn't go to sleep, if the timeout was extended to a long enough span that it hasn't been an issue, or if it just has gotten that good at waking up. But either way, when trying to simulate that issue by leaving the keyboard untouched for long periods of time, upon returning, it didn't miss a beat and was immediately ready for key presses. I am so very glad to see this change as it was a major hiccup with the original version. Finally, we have the battery. Keychron continues to use a 1550 milliamp hour battery, which they quote at 78 hours with no backlight on and only 40 hours with RGB at the lowest level. These numbers are a bit concerning. In using the keyboard with backlighting on full blast, I had to charge this keyboard regularly. I think it's worth considering just using this keyboard in a wired mode if that won't bother you. And for Keychron, I think they really need to start shipping larger batteries since most of their competition are already using batteries that are more than double that capacity. Now on to value and pricing. First, from an overall perspective, Keychron is and continues to be one of the best value keyboard brands around. They're not discount by any stretch, but for how full-featured and solid their keyboards are, they're typically a great deal. When thinking about these low-profile versions in particular, it's good to recap the changes in the various models. Now first, we have the original versions. As of late, it seems like these original models are soon to be completely discontinued. Of the original K-series keyboards, 7 of the 9 of them, when I was writing this script, were completely sold out on Keychron's website, with the 2 remaining being partially sold out. It seems like Pro and Max will be the only 2 versions going forward, so as a result, we're just going to look at pricing for those. Now, when we move from the original up to the Pro models, we first introduced that QMK and VIA support that allowed us to customize some keys on this one. They moved from ABS to PBT keycaps, albeit with a different color scheme, and they moved to the Keychron 2.0 switches. Now, when moving from Pro to Max, you include all of those changes, plus we move back to the original colors, add in that 2.4 gig USB receiver, and add some additional acoustic foam to help with typing sounds. For those additions between Pro and Max, you'll pay an additional $10 on any model. Those prices will start at $94 for white backlighting and a non-hot swappable design. Then you go to $104 for RGB non-hot swappable, and finally you get to $114 at the top for RGB with hot swap capabilities. Next, I wanted to provide just a quick word of caution when buying these keyboards. First, Keychron charges a shipping charge on all of their orders from their website, so factor that into your pricing expectation. Also, as a result, when they sell their products on Amazon, they increase the prices from MSRP in order to account for that lack of a shipping charge. They unfortunately also do a terrible job of making their Amazon listings clear, as you're faced with a big old block of text for a title, and often you'll see individual listings for each specific variation of the keyboard, of which there can be many when you factor in things like backlighting options, switch types, and hot swappable or not. A really easy mistake is to see this listing, for example, and believing it to be the same as the RGB hot swappable version on their website, since they're essentially the same price. However, this is the non-hot swappable version with a $10 shipping charge built in. I'm not a fan of this practice at all, and I don't want you to wind up ordering something that you'll regret, so please be careful. If it doesn't say RGB backlighting, it's not RGB. If it doesn't say hot swappable, it's not hot swappable. Further complicating buying on Amazon is that you may not be able to find every version. For example, at the time of writing, you can find any version of the RGB non-hot swappable Max keyboard on Amazon in the US, but if you want white backlighting, you can only get red switches. And if you want RGB with hot swap, you have to choose between blue and brown switches. They also all have that $10 upcharge compared to the Keychron website pricing in order to account for shipping. I'll try to add links to all of the versions in the video description, though some may not exist. All of these links are affiliate links, so if all of this information has been helpful to you and you plan to pick one up, using that helps support the channel. Buying challenges aside, this keyboard will satisfy a ton of users out there. While it doesn't have too many things that make it truly remarkable, it does just about everything well. My key differentiators include bringing back the iconic Keychron color scheme, having the option to save money by foregoing hot swap and RGB if you want, and if those are not important to you, improvements over the older Keychron versions by utilizing PBT keycaps, including a 2.4 gig receiver, continuing to have a clicky switch option, even as that seems to dwindle in the marketplace. And finally, having what I estimate to be likely the smallest footprint for a low-profile keyboard on the market today. For potential deal breakers, the biggest one is the small battery, which I really hope gets improved in the future. Next is that RGB key, which we talked about at length, which has solutions but is still annoying, at least for me. And finally, although the keyboard is solid, it's not the best sounding keyboard or the best typing experience. Keyboards continue to get better and better all the time. As we've covered here, Keychron continues to make improvements generation over generation. However, with how new this keyboard is, it should have a better battery and ideally some better typing. Otherwise, they're at risk of pretty quickly falling behind the competition. Thank you so much for watching. We are on a mission to get to 10,000 subscribers before the end of the year, so please consider hitting that subscribe button if you enjoyed the video. If you'd like another one to watch, check out my review of the Keychron M4 mouse. It's this super tiny mouse that I kind of bought by mistake but wound up absolutely loving. I appreciate you making it to the end, and I will see you in the next one.